welcome all. When the snow started falling a few days ago, we were all wishing we were in Italy. Fortunately, our weather has improved greatly, and tonight will be warmer still as our virtual journey takes us to southern Italy. In 2023, John Glionna experienced a cultural awakening. He traveled to his grandfather's home village to explore the landscape where his roots ran centuries deep. As he met distant relatives, he asked questions echoed by all Americans exploring their ancestral homeland. Who are these people? Who am I? As a veteran Los Angeles Times reporter in search of long-repressed Italianitá, he travels far off the tourist map where he examines his grandfather's motives for immigrating. Beyond poverty and disease, he learns that Southerners of his era faced a historic discrimination from their own countrymen that also drove them abroad. This book examines his father's upbringing as a child of immigrants and focuses on a realization that the author, like his father and grandfather, is proudly, deeply Italian, Southern Italian. John Glionna was a Seoul-based Los Angeles Times foreign correspondent from 2008 to 2012. He covered North Korea, North South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Pacific Islands. Later, as the paper's Las Vegas bureau chief, Glionna covered the American West. He's written extensively about California and co-taught a journalism course at the University of Nevada. Glionna is now a freelance writer who divides his time between Las Vegas, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. He's the author of No Friday Night Lights, Outback Nevada, Real Stories from the Silver State, Rebels and Outliers, and his new book, In the Land of the Midday Sun. Vincent Panella's books include his memoir, The Other Side, Growing Up Italian in America, a novel, Cutter's Island, a short story collection, Lost Hearts, and his newest novel, Sicilian Dreams. He lives in Marlborough, Vermont. Vincent will be in conversation with John, and we are excited to welcome them here. Welcome, John and Vincent.
Thank you, Sandy. And
Sandy.
I'd like to say do I detect a Southern accent a little bit, Sandy, or is that a Vermontese accent?
Dallas.
Dallas. Oh, there we go. Well, one of the things that that Vince and perhaps any Italians out in the listening audience will know is that one of the things about being an Italian American is that nobody pronounces your name right, and you just understand that, and it was a bane of my existence when I was a kid. But I will answer to anything. So, but Glionna for all of you, that's the way it's pronounced. So, but Sandy, what's your last name? Let me see if I can try it. She's gone.
She's gone. Her last name is Rouse, Rouse.
Oh, okay, well, that's good.
Well, anyway, John, here we are. It's really more than a pleasure to meet you and be with you. I've been listening, watching your blog. Your blog is also so interesting. I'm really interested in learning about that indigenous American football team with only 8 players and how they got along. But this book, Land of the Midday Sun, is without a category. It's both a memoir, it's a journal, it's a diary. I'm sure there's a little bit of fiction mixed up in this. It's also a history. Um, it's not only the history of a southern Italian town, but a history of the people in it who are really emblematic of Italian history and going way back, which you get into in the book. What I find the book so interesting is that it's um, it handles all these issues beyond beyond the just the character sketches. The characters were really very interesting, but they also represent everything about it. You managed to connect them to Italian history. I think maybe we could start by just telling us a little bit about how your main, your main interest in writing the book was emotional, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit. And before that, I could also add that your story is a story that any American of any nationality could identify with, even if you're not Italian American, because we all come from somewhere. And maybe you can start by telling us why you wrote this book.
Yeah, thank you,
Long
Terry.
history, this book that segues into characters and issues, but it's definitely a personal book as well.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. I should say that I don't look Italian, obviously. My mom was from British heritage, so we growing up we had 7 kids in our family in upstate New York, and some of us looked Italian, some of us didn't, and I never felt Italian. My dad didn't speak the language at home. My mom, of course, couldn't speak the language. I didn't feel Italian. I had to, kind of repeat the spelling and the pronunciation of my name. But growing up, felt like just an American white bread kid. And I used to there's a phrase I use in the book quite a bit, and it's pronounced as mascalzone, which is mascalzone is sort of like a ruffian, a punk. And I was a punk, and I would tell people, when I was in high school and college, I didn't know where my family was. I barely could find Italy on a map, to tell you the truth. And coming from the South and the so-called boot, I would tell people, and I'm a bit ashamed to say this now, I'm very ashamed, that I said, yeah, my family's from Italy. I said, if the boot of Italy stepped in some dog shit, where the shit would cake up underneath the heel, that's where my family's from. So that's the identity I had, and which is none at all. I became a journalist and a traveling journalist, and I traveled across the United States, and I was a correspondent in Asia for the LA Times for a number of years. I did a pretty good share of traveling, and when I left the Times and was looking at my own pursuits, I started thinking back to places that were important to me. I write for adventure. I go places because I would like to go, and then I write about those experiences. And so my father had already passed away, but at this point, my grandfather was long dead. But I had been to the small town before 2016 when I left the LA Times. I'd been there, 4 times, and I kind of knew what the lay of the land was. And so what I wanted to do is go back and find out what I could about my grandfather. My grandfather's sort of a sphinx. He was illiterate pretty much when he left Italy in 1905, and I don't think my memories of him are just grunts and my father coming to visit him in a little house he had in upstate New York. I don't think I've ever had a real conversation with my grandfather. So, but I did know what he had passed down to my father without the language. It was sort of the customs and the feel. My father's a very emotional man. There were senses of what we call Italianitá in my dad. And so I wanted to find out where that came from. What was the wellspring of these feelings? So I went back, I wrote a letter and asked my relatives. I said, I want to come back and work on a book, and I'm going to tell stories. And journalists, we tell stories oftentimes that don't want to be told. So I did. I went back for 2 summers in 23 and 24. And the book was a result of that research that I did about, and I'll say, one other thing just to break it down. My grandfather had an older brother, and he had 3 sisters. The older brother and one of the sisters never left Pomarico, and then my grandfather did. So the Glionna name, there are a bunch of Glionnas from my family that are from the tree of my great my, what do you recall, my grandfather's brother, and there was my grandfather in our lineage. So all of these Glionnas I could trace to these 2 Glionna family trees, and one of them in particular, the hero of my story, is my namesake. His name is Giovanni Glionna, and he's a very important part of my book.
John, I was wondering if you would think about this question that I think about all the time. I mean, I have the same experience of going back to a town, but not as deeply as you. But what I've always wondered is why is the subject so powerful still 100 years after the main immigration of Southern Italians into America? Italian writers and poets are still writing about it. What do you ascribe that? Did you ever think about that, or do you ascribe that to? People are still writing about it. I mean, people, the first generation Italian writers, like I can't remember any of them right now, but they sort of had had their moment, and now people are still writing about that. They're still going back to something where my grandpa said, when I asked my grandpa, "Why did you come here?" He said, "There's nothing there. There's nothing there." He kept repeating that, but that's not true.
Hmm. No, it's not true. And there was something there, although the conditions were no doubt at the era when your grandfather and my grandfather left at the beginning of the 20th century, that life was difficult, especially in the South. I think the reason that we're all coming to terms with it is it's such a dynamic culture and the roots run so deeply. And I'm not saying the roots from other European nations or people who are living here that are second generation Poles or other that they don't run deeply. But there's something about being an Italian in America that we have our identity is largely misunderstood as being, when people hear you're from Italy, they think of The Godfather and they think of what are kind of stereotypes. And I have my wife is from China, and I feel the same thing going back to China. The world, especially Americans, their perception of who the Chinese people are quite different than what they really are. They're really a warm, family-oriented, intelligence-seeking culture, and the Italians are just the same. And especially when you narrow it down to a small town in the South, and just to give people an idea, I would say my wife loves to go to Italy, but she loves to go to Florence and Venice and Rome in the northern part. That's not my Italy. My Italy has nothing to do with Michelangelo's hands. My Italy is more like West Virginia. It's the southern part of it. My ancestors they got dirt in their fingernails. They worked. There wasn't much art in their life. It was work. And but the people are so the culture's so rich and the people are such characters. And what I tried to do is go back and excavate a little bit about my grandfather's story, but write about who these people are. And so again, there's only 3,500 people in Pomarico, and it's very small. It's a hill town. It's located near Matera, which is there's the Sassi in Matera, which is probably what most people who have heard anything about southern Italy have heard about because these ancient, stone dwellings where people have lived for 50,000 years. Pomarico, no one goes to Pomarico. There's no hotel there. Well, there's a few now with maybe one or two rooms, but no tourists go there. It's basically people who live there or people like me who come back on some sort of, vision quest of, family research. So not a lot changes. And I wanted to go there and describe, like, who am I, for one thing, because I have an identity of myself thinking as an older man versus a, flippant teenager. And who are these people? And God, it's emotional sometimes for me to think about it. Some of the connections I've made, not just with family members, but friends, that these people are they're now close to my identity. And I don't know looking back, I don't know who I would be without them in my life anymore.
So, John, you spent these years, I mean, 3 or 4 years at various times, various intervals in Pomerico. Could you mind reading one of my favorite openings of the book? I could read it, or you could. We talked about it before. This is where it's kind of like a picture of the town.
Yeah, it's
Top,
it's it's
think-
four paragraphs. I go ahead, Vince, if you want to read it, or I got it called up.
Okay.
So yeah, for
Oh,
listeners.
let me read it because I love the writing. So,
Oh, okay, no, go ahead, please do.
yeah, this is actually the very beginning of the book. It's a couple of paragraphs down. As a second generation Italian American, I am a grandson of Pomerico, and this is my pilgrimage. I have walked its uneven cobblestones at quick twilight, long before the unrelenting midday sun drives every living thing, even the birds, into shade. I have stood and listened in darkness and in light to the life song of this town and this public square, drinking in its foreignness. No matter how badly I want to understand and connect with this place, it speaks a language that is not my own. Perhaps, I tell myself, if I try hard enough, remain here long enough, its essence will slowly enter my body, seep through my eyes and ears, through the pores in my skin. If I stay still, watch and listen, perhaps I can hear this place, taste it, translate it. Maybe then this piazza will speak to me. The name, Pomerico, comes from pomerium, the Latin word for orchard. I long to avere radici, grasp its roots. I claim a sense of it, so that becomes a vital part of who I am. But there's a risk in this mission. Perhaps time here will reveal something else. That my link to this place and its people is more tenuous than I'd hoped. I might find that I'm a fool's errand, that I'm more American than Italian American, that I have no place here. Perhaps I'll always be the outsider, never fitting, always looking in. So,
Good
what
job.
do you think of, do you still have that feeling of always looking in? Will you always have it? I think we
Oh,
probably do.
I think so. I think there's a limit to the of how much my identity there is that perhaps not one of them, but someone who's of bloodlines who feels them and who respects this life, and it's something, their life is something that I want to be a part of. Um, I'm not ready to get an Italian citizenship. I wouldn't mind buying a house in Pomorco, but my wife, wouldn't. As I was mentioning earlier, she loves to go to northern Italy, and a day in Pomorco is enough for her. But I don't mind spending. I'm going in next month, and I've got one of my cousins is got a place for me right near the piazza, which I was writing about, and I can't wait to get back to my pizzeria and my morning coffee, my morning cafe, and wandering around town. So yeah, I also want to bring up, just as a reminder to folks, if you have any questions, fire them at us in the Q&A section, and we're monitoring those, and we can get to those.
Yeah, John, I also was very struck in your book of the way you were able to segue into the history of Italy. Even when you were talking about people, you were able to relate them to, even from the beginning of this town. Um, there's another section that I think is so well written. The town's historic district rises above Largo Chiesa like an ancient whitewashed chess piece. Across centuries, invaders came, Greeks and Byzantines, Normans and Bourbons, Saracens and marauders from across the Mediterranean. The constant danger drove citizens to build hilltop fortresses with thick walls and steep embankments, this is what you're talking about. Long before the age of gunpowder, they hurled rocks down upon their invaders. When I see these hilltop villages, observed Francesco de Sanctis, the 19th century Italian literary historian, I conceive of a wild time of men against men, in which people sought shelter on the tops of mountains as in the flood. There are so many southern Italian towns like that, and as they say, they still, even though there is nothing there, there's still an attraction to not only Italian Americans but anyone born here. Um, can you tell us the relationship of this humble vegetable, the onion, to the Italianitá of the town and of your own personality?
Yeah,
The onion has many layers.
yeah, no, like the onion, right?
It's a perfect metaphor.
Yeah, for people who haven't been in, everyone's been to a small town, but small town Italy, is the idea that people they don't live there because they couldn't find a job elsewhere. They live there because they want to. They wouldn't think of living anywhere else, generations upon generations. And we were speaking earlier, there is a Pomar-Cajun dialect, a whole new language that I can't speak. And my cousins say, yeah, why don't you learn the Pomar-Cajun dialect? And I tell them I'm struggling enough with my formal Italian, and I'm still like a advanced beginner, and I struggle with my Italian when I'm there. But there are four families who from Pomarico, and I think the word originated, the last name originated there, has some Greek influence, much like Southern Italy does and Pomarico does. Um, but there are four families that are Glionas that are not related to me, and everyone in a small southern town in Italy and other small towns, you have a nickname that is come up with, and people know you by that nickname. And so the the nicknames for the other four families, one of them was Teratosta Glionas, which is hard ground, Volpe Glionas, the fox, and my family's nickname in in dialect is Chupadon, and Chupadon is a big onion. And apparently, in the ancestors past, somebody had a big Glionna had a big bumper crop of onions, and so that's what my our nickname is. So when I go to Pomarico, and I will say that in a way that I feel almost a celebrity status, or maybe a clown in a church. People know who I am. I'm not sure I'm a celebrity. That's probably a wrong word to use. Well, people see me because I'm tall and I'm a big white guy. But most of the people I'm related to somehow. Most of them, if I don't, they know my family. And so when people call out in the streets and I'm walking down, it's never like, hey, Giovanni, it's a Chupadon. People ride by in cars, and so that is who I am. And I thought about naming this book, The Big Onion, but a friend of mine said it sounded like a cookbook, so
Well,
I decided to go another direction.
you must be very proud of yourself to be sort of integrated in a way there. Do you notice that most of the people there can speak two languages, dialect and sort of proper Italian?
Yeah,
That's I noticed.
almost younger generation speaks pretty much formal Italian and with some dialect. The older generation, the guys that I that are my age on the park benches, uh, you know, they are they are there, and they are always watching. They're sort of like there's park benches throughout the small town, and there's old guys sit there and they just watch the world go by, and so that they speak dialect. What I will say is, out of 3,500 people, I can count on one hand the people who speak English. So
Right.
there's just nobody. So you pretty much walk into another realm when you go there. You put your English away, because
Yeah.
if you can't express yourself in Italian, then
Do you,
it's
yeah.
tough.
Do you detect a sense of pride among the dialect speakers in their dialect, as it's something they don't want to give up?
Oh yeah, and they all think that their dialect is the most beautiful. And I have a listener, a friend here, Angela Glover, who is in one of my Italian speaking groups, and she owns a home in Ferrandina, a little town that is really like the next little hill town from Pomarico. You can see Pomarico from Ferrandina, and we can see Ferrandina from Pomarico, and they have a totally different dialect there. And
Right. Right.
yeah, and you would go, you might understand it, but you might not. And so here's someplace you can see. Imagine driving across the United States, and you go on a road trip, and you stop. You can pretty much understand anybody. But in Italy, if you stop in these small towns, maybe just one that's 10 miles away, they're speaking a different language than you do. They can't speak formal Italian, and formal Italian, it's on the television. But in the day-to-day lives, they speak, you're a chupadone.
Mm. John, your book just gives us so much information about Italian history and so many aspects of the culture that are important. Could you touch, well, before I ask you to read something, could you touch on the difference between North and South and how that came about? Because
Yeah,
that's pretty much good part of your book is the sort of the onus of what some people make too much of this, but it's the onus of being a Southern Italian, or the onus of being, from an area that's been neglected by the government.
well, one of the reasons I went to Italy is to find out who my grandfather was. So I was, as I had mentioned earlier, my grandfather was, pretty much illiterate. So there were a treasure trove of letters that he wrote or family wrote. There were no letters. All I was able to piece together were documents from a few different church sources or in the commune, the city hall, and going on. I can find out where he lived. I find out the documents when he got on various boats on the manifest to go to the United States. I really didn't know who my grandfather was. And one of the questions was, why did he come? And of course, during the late 1800s, early 1900s, the South especially was just abject poverty. And there's one of the pictures, Jerry. I don't know if you see it there, but there's a picture of like a stable. And if you can pull that picture up, I will explain it when it comes up. But the standard of living, most people, and when my grandfather left, they lived in. There was no running water, there was no electricity, and people who were living in the small, and agrarian people, farmers, they slept with their livestock because they wanted to protect them from being. This picture, thank you, Jerry. This is a picture that I took. This is where my grandfather's older brother lived. That was his family. So the livestock would be there on the right, and then the ladder was up to where the family slept, and it's pretty much unchanged. So this is the life that, and there could be a family of like parents and six kids living in this little hovel. Look at the roof is kind of thatch. So that's what he left. It's obviously the promise of America was that there was, the streets were paved with gold. But I began to suspect early on that there might have been some other reasons that my grandfather left. And one of them was that the Southern Italians were discriminated against by their own people. And it's almost like I'm trying to think. I won't say not so much the arrogance of the North, but Northern Italians have, for good reason, with their history, they and their wealth and their dynamic economy, which has always been the case, they look down upon the South as sort of mob infested and people who are just on the government dole. In 1861, Italy was and I'll say this briefly, but 1861, when the Italian, when Garibaldi, fought against some of these other outsiders and liberated southern Italy from the Bourbons, from the French and the northern, they were liberated. Italy, got together for the first time, and it's not that long ago, 150 years ago, and they had a king and they had a government. But as soon as they started forming that government, what they started to do was delineate between the North and the South. And the South was the Southerners see the way their role in history was that they were not included, but a lot of their assets were pillaged by the North, and suddenly there were taxes. Suddenly, they had to go military service, and a lot of these people that are from these small villages were like, WTF, because they don't have a the word in Italian for country is paese, and paese also means village. And so for many Italians, the village is the country. Your family is the country. I mean, we get that sense with all of our mobster films that family comes first. In a lot of regard, that's true. So after armies of so-called brigands that fought against the North, and they were sent into extinction. But by the time the later 1800s came, the rate of death was one of the highest in Europe. Kids died before 10 years old. They had the lowest rate of literacy in Europe. So other than poverty, here's my grandfather coming in to the United States, and of course he we've all heard of the what Italians were called, from Dagos to Wops. But what I found interesting is that kind of discrimination for Southern Italians started before they even came, and they had their identity as Italians when they got to the United States. If they came, the people from my community, my town, when they came, they knew themselves as Pomaricans. What was Italy? They were from Pomarico. They were Chupadon. And then suddenly they get to the United States, and there's all these people looking at it like, well, you're Italian. And then that's the first time they embraced this kind of national identity. So I would love, I would love to read something at the end of the book where I kind of deal with this, where my grandfather really remains a sphinx. But through my reporting, what I found was that my dad didn't speak the language, but there was a lot of Italianitá. There was a lot of things he brought to me through his customs, the way he had a family. I had a whole chapter about how Italian my father was without even speaking the word. And so, so did my family run away from discrimination? And it's still a debate.
You know, one thing I was thinking about is that you're trying to capture and you capture so well is just the feeling of being Italian. And
Yeah.
that's that is, and one of the things that I really enjoyed about your book is your daily adventures of going out and having your coffee and having your cappuccino and meeting people who are really interesting people. For example, could you tell us about some of the people who are most important to you? I wrote a few names down: Vincenzo, Bruno, Maggie the Butcher. These are people who are stuck around Pomarco.
Yeah,
Vincenzo, the one. Maybe it's because my name is Vincenzo. Maybe I wanted to talk, or you could pick out one of the characters who's most prevalent to you, uh, and
well,
represent, emblematic of what you're after.
imagine a day in like a small town when you wake up and you go for your morning coffee, and I don't. There's someone used to like a 16-ounce Starbucks. I just couldn't wrap my mind around espresso because it was over too quickly, and so I would get the little larger cappuccinos. So I'd have a couple cappuccinos, get my caffeine buzz, and then I would go visiting. And so one of the characters in my book is a guy named Vincenzo Palma, and he runs a pizzeria right in the main piazza which was the center of my activities. And Vinny's dad went to the United States in the 1950s when Vinny was young, and Vinny's father ran this pizzeria, and he dreamed of a better life in America. He goes to the United States. Vinny grows up in Brooklyn schools. He joins the Navy, and his father never really caught on. He never really got that. Sold his bar to go, took his family, and in the end, Vinny, after he left the Navy, came back to Italy and met a woman there, and then moved back, and now he rebought the bar. So now he runs the bar that his father used to run. And so some of his customers knew his dad, and it's like this multi-generation. And I don't know if Jerry, you can pull up a photograph. There's a picture of me sort of looking very MBA in Vinny's pizzeria. But I tower over him, and I'm just sort of leaning down, to say,
I remember that photo. Yeah, I don't know if Jerry's going to be able to
it's in
get
there
it.
somewhere. But I would go in, and Vinny spoke English. He's one of the few who did, because but he spoke it with a Brooklyn accent. But Vinny, I'd walk in the kitchen, and he was always behind these swinging doors, and he's in the pizzeria. Yo, Vinny, and he'd come in. John, how you doing, John? He'd come in, and he'd take time, and we would talk, and he'd hear about my adventures. And Vinny, to me, is he's family. There are two other characters. One named Mike, and Mike. One day when I first arrived, there's Vinny and I. And how do you not love Vinny? And the pictures there you can see on the side of this is pictures of the bar when his dad ran it. And so he's a very very conscious of the past. But when I first got to Pomarico, I was coming up to my apartment, and there was a gentleman, an older gentleman, and he just said, "Are you John?" And it was like music to my ears. I heard English, and his name was Mike. He had similar story to Vinny. He left, his family left when he was really young. Brooklyn, was in Brooklyn, which the Italians referred to at the time as Brucolino. And they grew up, and they lived a couple miles away from each other. And Mike came back, married a woman from the village. And Mike said, he heard from one of my family members that I was here, and he offered his help. And Mike became Mike is I found out later that we're related. And in Pomarico, you might say that the chances are you're related to somebody versus not being related. So it's very distant sometimes, but to me, blood is everything, and to them, blood is everything. So we were taking a trip once, and Mike said, "Oh, we need a photographer. Let me call Bruno." And so Bruno is this kind of very eloquent a man who's a police officer and a big avid photography buff. and Bruno was larger than life. And I say in the beginning that the way he pronounces his name, it's almost like he's a big Russian bear. It's like Bruno, and Bruno became our photographer. So Mike and Bruno and I traveled around Basilicata for the 2 summers, and I wrote about our travels. Bruno was the, sort of photographer. Mike was sort of the fixer, and I would write about things. And we became, Pomarco was too small to ever have a newspaper. So we went on, did stories about people, and we published, I wrote them on my blog. Bruno would translate them and publish them on his Facebook page so the Pomaricans could read them. And for the first time, they had someone who was paying attention to their town. There wasn't the occasional reporter from Matera who would come. And so people read us, and I was stopped in the street saying, I liked your story, which, was pretty wild. Not everyone liked what I wrote, and, we could talk about that, Vince, but, and the last thing I'll say, the main character, there's Bruno there. And there is the Chiesa Madre behind him. That is the main church in the square where that church was rebuilt in the mid 1800s. This church, life in Pomarco revolves around this church. When you were born, you go and you're baptized there. You have, being a Catholic country, you have your first communion in this church. You get married in this church. Your kids are baptized. When you die, you have your funeral. This church is it. And so everything revolves around this church. But the main character of my book, as I mentioned, is a 86-year-old. He's a descendant of my grandfather's older brother, Giovanni Glionna. And if you want to pull up the picture, Jerry, of the man who's given the traditional Italian finger up, that's Giovanni. And Giovanni is I really, stumbled to sort of describe him as sort of a jack of all trades. And we call him, the nickname we have for him is El Sindaco, because he's like the mayor of the town. He knows everybody. He's got his own little plot of land, this farming. He has 3 daughters. When I first went to Pomarco in 1987, I met Giovanni, and now coming back now, since now he's a great grandfather. And so he is my touchstone. If I go to Pomarco to find my roots, Giovanni is me. If my grandfather had stayed, this is me. He's so close to me and everything he does. And there he is. And he looks like Johnny Carson as well. I don't know if you can see the resemblance here. We call him Carson is the nickname, but we also call him El Sindaco, the mayor. But so, these guys, along with Maggie is a woman who is she's now the vice mayor of Pomarco. And I love Maggie. Maggie, it was a butcher's daughter, and she listens to Depeche Mode, and she runs around town blasting her stereo, and she speaks a little bit of English. And I don't think it's too strong to say that I love these people.
One thing
I'm
I,
not,
I one thing I get from the book, of all the pleasure of reading about these people, is a sense of pride in place. These people don't seem to be unhappy about living there.
no,
Maybe I'm
they
wrong. There's a
they
sense of
couldn't imagine anything else.
the fact that they drove you around, they were so receptive to your quest, driving you here and there so you can make your researches and everything like that. It implies a really sense of pride in place.
They
Which,
don't leave
what I was
Pomarco.
talking about, this sense of Italian pride, you see it on t-shirts.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, they don't. I was texting early on with a cousin of mine who was 17 at the time, and we developed a relationship before my first trip there. And I just, was like kind of playing American. I said, "So are you applied to colleges?" And his response was, "College is not for me." He can't imagine leaving Pomark. I mean, his mother, he has a tattoo of his mother's name on the side of his chest, which is common for young Italian men. There's a phrase called mamoni, and the Italian men, they stay joined to their moms for a large part of their life because their mothers take over everything, and they're really the central figure of the Italian culture. The fathers are, but the mothers, they rule the roost. And he couldn't imagine living away. So, he's got 2 older brothers. They live in a modern apartment, but they're one of them now, one of them is 19 now, the other one's 27, the other one's 31, and they share the same room. There's a bunk bed with the two, and then the older brother gets the room on the floor. And I asked them, I said, do you crave some privacy? And they couldn't understand what I was talking about. It's like, the privacy. What are you talking about? Privacy. That's who they were. So I asked Mike once that a lot of Puerto rarely travel in their own county, like Basilicata. Great. Thank you, Jerry. This is Mima, and Mima's my cousin, and the youngest is Gabrielle is to her the seats to the left, and then the two older boys are there. I took that picture over lunch at their grandfather's. Giovanni has created my cousin. He has created this castle for his family. Him and his wife Laura live on the first floor. Mima lives on the second floor with her family, and on the third floor, another daughter lives with her family. So when you go to Giovanni's and you sit there, and I made a point to stop by every day at lunch, there was a revolving door of people rolling in there at Grandma and Grandpa's place for dinner, and one of there's one of the daughters has a cousin who moved to Montesquieu, which is a town nearby. And, she went to the big city. I mean, all these people live in Pomarico. And Mima texted me the other morning asking how I was doing, and she said she was really sad. And apparently a young kid, she's in a church group, and some young boy who was in high school, he committed suicide in Pomarico, and he jumped from the roof. And she said, we're a small town, we know everybody, and it really affected her that there was this suicide. And so, you drop a pebble in Pomarico and everybody feels it.
One thing I was struck by, and this is the difference between the generations, and is that the people in America are computer literate,
Yeah, they are.
and
They're
that
very,
was surprising to me.
Yeah, no, they've embraced that. That's for sure. It's their way to reach out to the world. I mean, if they're not going physically, and they're big on emoji. The emojis are like, oh my God, it's the
And
overuse of emojis. But no, they're right there, and that's how I keep in touch with my relatives through WhatsApp, and so yeah, no, I have daily conversations with my Italian relatives.
is there any effort to bring other people into the town, like you often see on the internet? People in these small towns are selling their houses for $10, or to try to bring people in. Is there any effort like that in Pomerico?
Yeah, there is, and it's an uphill battle. Most of these small Italian towns have what they call a centro storico, and the centro storico is the old town. Pomarico and if you can pull up, Jerry, the first picture of showing Pomarico from the distance, um, it was a hill town. When they built these towns, because they were always attacked by outsiders, they built the towns on the tops of hills, and they made a fortress around them so they could protect themselves. So the oldest parts of the town are always in the ones on the top of the hill. And so as you can see this picture, I described it as a question mark where the bottom of the or the exclamation point, and then the newer part of the town, drifts off to the right. So Pomarico's Centro Storico is sometimes has fallen into a little bit of disrepair. And so the mayor, you walk up the very top, and they're abandoned. There's and they haven't been lived in for a generation or two. So there is in a lot of small Italian towns, the mayor basically, you can come in and you can buy a house for $1, but you got to fix it up. And
Right.
so, and a lot of these, you can't get a car all the way up to the top of some of these places, so they're a little bit isolated. And it's a huff and a puff to the top, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we don't have anything on the Q&A, but we do have lots of stuff on the chat.
oh,
So we should try to find something that I think will generate some. Let me see. My paternal grandparents are from Gela, a small mountain village south of Barcelona, Pozzo, and Di Goto, Sicilia. My father and I were both born in Baltimore, Maryland, USA. I am a dual citizen of USA and Italy. I made a pilgrimage to my ancestral village in 2015 and was greeted by over 80 distant relatives A powerful experience.
Yeah, I mean, you
There are a
talk to
lot of,
many people of our generation that they've got these memories and the family stories. And, I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, you don't necessarily, I wrote this book as a very personal project. I wrote it for Pomarico, to tell you the truth. And I wrote it, for my family. I'm glad to talk about it. But I think there's this sort of return to the roots kind of thing that people do, kind of like family, tourism. And, if you haven't, go back to these places and just visit them and learn a little bit of the language. Go back and find out, even if you're only there for a few days on a bigger trip, they're so glad to have you. They're so proud that you've come back. And,
a lot of
and
these, yeah, a lot of these comments on the chat. I started reading John's blog in summer 2023. I spent 3 weeks driving over 1,000 miles through suburban southern Italy and Sicily that summer. It was very powerful to share his experience while having my own experience.
oh, great.
And
That's great. I'm glad I could have been your tour guide. I'm
a lot
sure.
of these comments in the chat are basically identifying with your experience and my experience and the experience of not only Italian Americans but others. Here's a Barese is different enough from Italian to have its own dictionary. That's people from Bari. I am the only non-Italian Italo-American here today. That would be a pity. This book is for everybody. So let's see. Thank you for
Jerry, Vince, I would like to say that just to leave the impression when you go back to these places and you spend some time, the postcard nature of these pretty places and their exotica kind of wears off after a while because being in a small town, I mean, I'm a journalist and I'm a Moscowzone. I still am. I'm a wise guy. I'm a punk. And I rub people the wrong way. And I make, my life is about making enemies and losing friends. I joke to my friends. And so I made some enemies in Pomarico, and I write about this in the book. And at one point, I wrote on my blog, I was describing a bunch of guys that hung out in a bar. They were real loud, and they drank all day, and I described them sort of like before I really got to know them early on as sort of it's like going to a biker bar, and I used the term umbriachi in Italian to describe them, which is basically a bunch of drunks.
yeah.
And and he called me over one day, and he goes, that some of the guys don't like, how the way you describe it. There was one guy in particular, and I came to call him the ringleader. And the ringleader gave me the stink eye every time. And I tried to appeal to the ringleader. I'm sorry. I wrote another blog post that circulated. I didn't mean this. It's, I have the poison pen. I apologize. I need the witness before I write. And as one of his friends said to me, who actually forgave me, he just said, "You're dead to him. There's nothing you can do to come back." And then he said, "When are you leaving?" And I said, "Oh, I'm leaving at the end of August." He said, "You'll be in a shallow grave by the 10th." And
Oh, God.
it was a joke. But I mean, I'm really curious now when I go back, and now this is the third year. Am I still going to get the stink eye from the ringleader? You know,
Right.
but that's the Pomarco experience, because and everyone who's been in a small town where you'll see somebody, and, oh my God, there they are. It's like, how do I duck into this store?
Yeah.
So
It
yeah,
doesn't take much. You can say the wrong thing or the wrong word, and
yeah.
that's it.
I mean, it's
You've got a Tony Soprano response.
well,
Uh,
what as I say in the book, that's an old joke, and I apologize, and I don't mean this to be, putting the Italians at all, but Italians are buried in with two caskets, one for their bodies and the other one for their grudges. And there
yeah.
are generations long rifts that go on, and I've had family members who don't talk to each other because something happened 40 years ago, and they just ignore each other. This is a typical picture of what you might find walking along the streets. These guys are like crows on a wire and they're hanging out. And the one guy to the left, paid me a compliment where I left the first summer, and he said, "Your Italian's really improved since you got here." And I really took that to heart. But I would stop and chat these boys up whenever I got a
Yeah.
chance because they
Are they
they
waiting for their Sunday meal?
they're they're waiting for the dinner bell to be called. That's for sure.
Yeah.
They for the coffee, but yeah, this is where they live in apartments, down, and the wife is probably home, but this is the bowling alley, this is the golf course, this is the gym, this is where they go to hang out, and they don't miss a thing. These guys.
Does Pomerico have a patron saint like most of these towns?
There is. Its name is San Michele, and I'm going to the festival of San Michele. And if you want to pull out, Jerry, if you want to pull up the Chiesa Madre again, every in the beginning of May, they have a 3-day festival where they take the statue of San Michele and they put it on this like they put it on these like a platform, and everyone shoulders it, and they carry it around the streets, and the streets are full, and the Italians are big. We have cultural festivals here in America, and they have religious festivals, and so this square is going to be filled. There's going to be people. So Bruno's saying, "Oh, you got to come." So I'm coming this year. So to the festival of San Michele, and I think St. Michael's done a pretty good job looking out over Pomerico, looking after it.
Well, we're sort of coming to a point where I was wishing you would read, and we were talking about you were reading something from sort of the end of the book, John.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. Let me just read this, and I'll set it up to say this. I went to Italy as some guy looking for his kind of roots, wherever those roots would be. And I realized that because of what we mentioned about the North and the South, I distinguish myself. Um, Basilicata, the province that my family's from, it used to be known as Lucania. And so a lot of people still see themselves as Lucanian. And I realized that where my grandfather, I could only learn so much about him. I just being there, and I took my father back to Italy in the 90s. And so we spent some time there in Pomarico together. And so this is sort of the end of the book where I'm saying, okay, well, what have I learned, and what am I writing? What did I learn from these experiences? And I'll just read it to you. It's not long. I am from Basilicata. I am Lucanian. I visit northern Italy to play tourist. I come to Pomarico to find home. My ancestral research has revealed much about my father, the man who produced me, shaped me, and instilled the traits I am most proud of. This realization did not come suddenly like an overnight summer storm, but gradually like fruit ripening on Giovanni's trees, like the slow passage of the old men who line these streets. While my grandfather may still linger in the periphery, my father has taken center stage. Across Pomarico, I feel his spirit beside me. This land, this town, and these people are an integral part of both of us. I now understand how this ancient culture, so steeped in family and loyalty, shaped the choices he made throughout his life. My journey here has helped me better understand the most important figure in my life, mio padre, my father. I once believed that if I could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, would have been Abraham Lincoln, the humble 19th century liberator. But today I would undoubtedly choose my grandfather and my father, the three of us seated at a table with good wine, where I could ask them all the questions I once didn't know to ask. Even imagining this scene brings tears to my eyes. I want to make them both, my grandfather and my father, proud of the Italian grandson I have become. That must be enough for now. It has to be. My time here is done. For now, life in Pomarico will continue without me. Men will crowd the bars, play cards, shout in the streets. Old women will sit coquettishly on their doorsteps, hands folded in their laps. A few might mention me in passing, perhaps fondly, the Americano who came and went, then returned decades later, like his grandfather and father before him, the troubadour. But I will not remain a memory for long. The bonds I have formed here are deeply rooted once again, and this time I know I will return. On my grandfather's honor, my father's, and my own, I make this promise.
That is so touching, and is a good coda to our talk. But I don't have anything on the chat in the form of a question. Let me see. Your opinion. Let's see here. A lot of comments in the chat are people who identify with the same idea of their hometowns.
Yeah, and that's the theme of this, whether
Yeah.
it's my hometown or everyone has got a Pomarico in their life.
Yeah.
And the idea is to go back and take time from our modern hectic lives, and and go back, and if you can't spend, I mean, spending a summer is a luxury. Even spending 2 weeks. And one of the things I found in Pomarico and other small towns is that you've got to ratchet down, a day in Pomarico. There's not much to do. And the Italians take their pisolino, which is sort of like the Italian version of the siesta, where the whole town closes up between 1 and 4, where people go home for a good meal and a snooze, and then they open up and they stay open later. But so if you need, you need something in between 1 and 4, you're out of luck. But the streets are there, and every step I take there makes me feel like part of something.
Right. And I can identify with that feeling that nothing happens in these places on the surface. Everything is quiet and
Nothing happens and everything happens. It's, that's
everything is steeped in history.
everything is steeped in personal history.
Here's a comment. There was a testimony from an Italian immigrant at Ellis Island in New York City that went something like, "We had heard that the streets of America were paved with gold. What I found out was not only were they not paved, but I was the one that had to pave them."
There
And
you
of
go.
course, no cappuccino after 11 a.m. Maybe our listeners would not need to be apprised of the coffee habits of Italians.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
the coffee habits.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about.
yeah, no, I thought that was your question. That's the reader's question. Yeah, I don't know if it sounds like we're coming out of time, but the Italians are really worried about their digestive tracts, and and so they don't drink milk at night. So cappuccino, you can have one in the morning, but afternoon, I mean, they let me do it because that was me. But you don't order in some, there's some, apocryphal stories of waiters saying they wouldn't serve it to you, but milk is not good for you after, Italians are talking about aperitivos and opening up the digestive tract and opening up the taste buds, and the languages, the mother tongue, and the food is they're obsessed with their own cuisine, and for good reason.
Yeah,
It's one of the best.
right.
Vincent and John, excuse me, sorry to butt in, but there is a question in the Q&A,
Oh, there is
and
one.
but yeah, and there's another one appeared.
Okay.
Can you describe the range of opinions the people from this town had about your translated thesis?
Oh, my translated book. Well, good question. My book is published in English, and it's published by the Bordighera Press, which is a foundation of Italian American scholars in New York. And their big thing is learning about the Italian diaspora. So they publish the book in English. One of the things I'm going to do this summer, I'm looking for an Italian publisher, because essentially if I handed my book out, I'd be handing something written in Greek. They can see the pictures and stuff. They don't understand anything. So I'm looking to be to really reach them with an Italian language book. But there were a lot of people who emailed after I would write something about the town, and somebody once said, "Oh, I'm just an interloper there, and what do I know? I'm just coming in trying to make more of my Italian heritage than I did," and that really hit me home, because that's exactly what I was not trying to do. And then somebody else defended me, saying, "Hey, he's bringing a very valuable perspective that we don't get a lot because we don't live here. So before you want to shoot the message, just listen to what he's saying, and maybe there's some truth to it," which is like what journalists do. So yeah, I would say that there was a pretty wide range, but I did get stopped a lot. People saying, "Hey, I read your piece. It was really good." And so I really want this book to be able to, other than the ringleader, I want everybody else in Pomarco to read this book.
There's one more comment. Aging society, question mark. Anxiety of low births and dwindling populations. Does this come up much?
Well,
Is there a
yeah,
low? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it does, but it's not. It's just sort of. It's not headline news, and I think that there are I spent a lot of time writing about the cemetery, and obviously they don't need any more space in the cemetery, because every year there are fewer births than deaths in Pomarco. So it's kind of an issue that they deal with in a piecemeal fashion. There's not, there's no campaign in Pomarco to have people, sort of have more kids like there are in other cultures in Japan and other places. But they're very aware that they're all those guys on the benches aren't going to be there in 10 years, and so that's something that affects people there and myself profoundly because I've already lost a few of my old friends that I met when I
One question I have is it still pretty prevalent for young men of Pomerico to leave and seek work in other countries and then come back?
Napo Marico. I mean, you know, they don't like two, three of my cousins have jobs in Matera, which is 10 miles away. And, you know, they're considered working outside, but there are no jobs in Pomarico. I mean, there really aren't, and you have to go other places, you know, to find work unless you're following in your, you know, your family's footsteps and minding the farm, but there are no jobs. There's no industry nearby really. Uh, and so you know, I can say that for my family, what's more important is to be close to your family and you'll make do to eke out a living in this place that is so close to you that you can't imagine life without.
Right. The valuable jobs are working for the post office or working for the road crew,
Exactly. Exactly.
and you get a good pension. Um, well, let's see.
Wow,
Sam,
that was amazing.
Oh,
Did you have another question you wanted to ask, Vince?
no, I wanted to talk about which he did. I wanted to because it was true in my family that a lot of them worked in Germany, but that was generations back. They were Sicilians from pretty much the same kind of a town.
generations ago, they
Very
did.
isolated.
Well,
Very.
it was lovely to hear that the image that they project of these sleepy southern Italian villages is actually real, and it's not a Hollywood thing. Um,
Yeah, it feels Hollywood, feels central casting, but you know, once you're there, there used to be a little theater in Pomarico, and they would go there. It's no longer there. They would run mostly Italian films because they have enough great films of their own. But the Clint Eastwood trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and A Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More, were very popular because it was exactly how the Italians saw themselves: isolation, strong characters, and so the guys still have nicknames. A lot of the old guys from that movie, which I find pretty hilarious.
well, thank you so much for the insider's trip where we were privileged to share it with you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, God, Vince, and thank
Thank
you,
you,
John.
John. Thank you for carrying the ball.
And I will say just one thing that for folks leaving, the book is available on not only on Amazon, but it's available on bookshop.org. It's actually cheaper than Amazon. And there's another website called Asterism, Asterism. It's available there as well for a bit cheaper. So if you're politically adverse to Amazon, there are other places you can find it.
Yeah, I think the link to bookshop.org is in our comments somewhere. So, our next literary cocktail hour will be on a very special date and time, Wednesday, May 13th at 5 p.m. We are excited to welcome James Schiff, who edited the selected letters of John Updike, and he will be in conversation with John Updike's son, Michael Updike. So, we hope you will join us. And until then, stay safe, stay well, and keep reading. Especially read James's book. Anyway,
Okay.
okay. Thank you very much. And read
Ciao,
John's
John.
book if you haven't read it
Grazie,
already.
grazie mille,
All right.
Giovanni and Vincenzo. Grazie mille. Sì.